Hello students, welcome to Red Shikshan Sanstha's present e-learning classes. Today we are going to learn Unit 4.3 The Red-Headed League. Before we understand the story, we should know the background about this story. Introduction and characters of the story. The Red-Headed League is one of the 56 Sherlock Holmes stories written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It first appeared in the Stand magazine in August 81. With illustration by Sidney Piggott. Conan Doyle ranked the Red-Headed League the second of his list of 1240 Holmes stories. It is also the second of the 12 stories in Adventure of Sherlock Holmes which was published in 1892. This Red-Headed League story taken from the book Sherlock Holmes which is written by Sir Arthur Conan. This firstly appeared in Stand magazine in August 81. Sherlock Holmes, this story is very famous and which is stood second in all his 12 stories in the Adventure of Sherlock Holmes, which was published in 1892. Now we are going to see the characters of this story. The characters are firstly Sherlock Holmes, a famous detective, Mr. Wilson, a pawnbroker, a person who lends money at interest. Vincent Spaulding, he was Mr. Wilson's assistant and also known as Johnny Clay. Mr. Duncan, he was a red-haired man in the office of Red-Haired League. Dr. Watson, a doctor and Sherlock's friend. Jabez Wilson, a red-headed shopkeeper. Mr. John, a detective from Scotland. Now we are going to see the story in detail. 4.3 The Red-Headed League. Part 1 Mr. Wilson's story. The story is narrated by Dr. Watson. When he entered and called Mr. Sherlock Holmes. When I called upon my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, he was conversing with the visitor, who was an elderly man with the fair red hair. In this picture, you can see the two people having red hair. The people, those who have the red hair, they used to call fairy red hair man. Holmes introduced me to the visitor. Me means Dr. Watson. The Holmes introduced Dr. Watson and Mr. Jabez Wilson and asked Jabez Wilson to repeat his whole story to Dr. Watson. And he began by showing an advertisement in newspaper. It was read as. Now pawnbroker means what? A pawnbroker means a person who lends money at interest. Now this newspaper article has as like to read headed league, there is a vacancy for a member of a league and the salary is £4 a week for a normal service. Red-headed men may apply in a person on Monday at 11 o'clock to Duncan's Rose at the office of the League 7 Fleet Street. This advertisement is shown by Mr. Wilson to Dr. Watson and Holmes. And then he started explaining the advertisement had appeared in the newspaper 2 months ago. Before 2 months ago, he had seen this advertisement in the newspaper. Mr. Wilson's assistant, Vincent Spaulding, who was the Mr. Wilson's assistant, Vincent Spaulding, had shown it to him. Who had shown this advertise? Mr. Vincent Spaulding had shown this advertising to Mr. Wilson. And Mr. Wilson liked his assistant Spaulding. Why he is liking him? Because he was so smart, efficient and worked for only half the normal way. But the assistant has his fault. Every now and then he left work and went down into the cellar to develop photograph. Photography was his hobby. Showed the advertisement to Mr. Wilson and explained to him that American millionaire Mr. Isaac Hopkins had founded the famous Red-Headed League to help all red-headed like himself. Spaulding urged Mr. Wilson to apply for the job. While showing this advertisement to Mr. Wilson, Spaulding explained that the person Mr. Isaac Hopkins wanted to help all the red-headed person by providing job. So Spouty was insisting Mr. Wilson to apply for this job. So the two of them went to the address given in the advertisement. Fleet Street was full of red-headed people. Mr. Wilson thought that with so much competition he would not get the job. He wanted to go back. After looking at so much rush, he not willing to enter there and he wanted to return to his office. But it was the Spaulding pushing through the crowd and took Wilson to the office. The Spaulding who was continuously forcing Mr. Wilson to go for that job. There was nothing in the office but a couple of chairs and a table. There was only a couple of chairs and a table. A red-headed man sat behind the table, and only a person who was sitting on the chair. He was also having a same hair, red hair. He was Mr. Duncan Rhodes, representative of Red-Headed League. He was very pleased to see Mr. Wilson and announced immediately that he was well suited for the job. After looking in a one glance, he immediately announced that Mr. Wilson has got this job and he is the only person who is suited for this job. After announcing that, he started explaining his duties about the job. He shook hands with Wilson and congratulated him and told all other candidates to go back. Duncan Rose explained that Mr. Wilson would have to be in the office from 10 to 2 and if he left the office he would lose the job. Sprouting assured Mr. Wilson that he would look after Wilson's business in the absence. So after receiving a positive reply from Wilson's as well as Duncan, Sprouting promised Mr. Wilson that he will going to take care about all his business and his office. So Mr. Wilson was relaxed and he accepted the job because the time and the payment was suited for him. The payment was fixed, that was £4 of a week. Look after Wilson's business in the absence, the payment was fixed for £4. And the work said, Mr. Wilson, you have to copy all Encyclopedia Britannica. And what was the work given to Mr. Wilson? He was just have to copy all Encyclopedia of Britannica. The pay was very good and the work was light. So Mr. Wilson accepted and began his work the very next day. Mr. Duncan Rose was there in the office to see that Mr. Wilson did his work properly and did not leave the office. So Mr. Duncan Rose, as being his boss, looking at Mr. Wilson and taking care about his duties toward his job. He told Mr. Wilson to start with the letter A. Mr. Wilson wrote diligently for 4 hours without leaving his place. Mr. Rose would drop in from time to time to see that all was right with the Mr. Wilson. At 2 o'clock, he bade Mr. Wilson goodbye and locked the door of the office. So every now and then, as being his boss, he used to look after Mr. Wilson's work. And at 2 o'clock, he used to say bye and lock the door. This much story we have learned today. The half part we are going to learn in the next time. Thank you, students. I hope you have understood the story.